The night she said it, she didn't raise her voice or smile like it was a joke. She just looked at me across the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around her mug, eyes calm in a way that made my stomach tighten. We were engaged, wedding cards half designed, families already calling us husband and wife. I thought I knew where my life was going. That's why when she said, "I need you to help me around the house properly, like my maid," I laughed at first. Then I saw she wasn't laughing back. I told myself it was stress. Wedding pressure. Her job. My job. Everything piling up. But she leaned forward and said my name slowly, the way she did when she was serious, and added, "Uniform included. Rules included. I want to see if you can really be there for me." My chest felt hot, then hollow. I wanted to say no. I wanted to ask why. Instead, I nodded, because that's what I'd always done when things got uncomfortable. I didn't realize that nod was the first step into a version of myself I had never allowed to exist. The first morning, the uniform was laid out neatly on the bed. Simple. Modest. Nothing shocking. Still, my hand shook when I picked it up. It wasn't about fabric. It was about meaning. About crossing a line I had spent my whole life pretending wasn't there. She stood at the door, arms crossed, not mocking, not cruel, just watching. "This stays between us," she said. "But you take it seriously." I did. Too seriously. I ironed it. I wore it. I avoided the mirror at first, like if I didn't look, it wouldn't be real. But it was real. Every chore felt louder than it should have. Every step echoed with questions I didn't know how to ask. Was this humiliation? A test? A game? Or something else entirely? She corrected how I cleaned, how I stood, how I spoke when I answered her. Not harshly. Precisely. And the strangest part was how my body reacted. Not with fear, but with a quiet focus I had never felt before. Like my mind finally had one clear instruction instead of 1,000 noisy doubts. Days passed. Then weeks. I told my friends I was busy. I avoided my family. Inside those walls, I was someone different. Not weaker. Not broken. Just softer in ways I had always hidden. One evening, I finally caught my reflection without looking away. The uniform fit. Not just physically. Emotionally. And that scared me more than anything else. Because for the first time, the question wasn't why she wanted this. It was why a part of me didn't want it to end. She noticed the change before I did. The way I moved. The way I listened. The way I stopped apologizing for existing and started paying attention to how I felt. "You're changing," she said quietly one night. I wanted to deny it. Instead, I whispered, "I know." My heart was pounding, not from shame, but from recognition. Like meeting a stranger who somehow knew all your secrets. That was when I realized this wasn't about chores or control. It was about identity. About peeling away the armor I had worn to survive and discovering what was underneath. I didn't know yet whether that discovery would save me or ruin everything I thought I wanted. All I knew was that there was no going back to who I was before she laid that uniform on the bed. After that night, something unspoken settled between us, like a quiet agreement that neither of us wanted to name out loud. She didn't push harder, but she didn't pull back either. The rules stayed the same, yet everything felt heavier, more meaningful. When she called for me, my name sounded different in her voice, not smaller, not mocking, but intentional. And every time I answered, I felt like I was choosing this, even if I didn't fully understand why. I started noticing details I'd ignored before. How my breath slowed when I focused on simple tasks. How my thoughts, usually racing with expectations of what a man should be, finally went quiet. There was peace in that silence, and it scared me. Peace isn't something you question until you feel it somewhere you were taught it doesn't belong. Late at night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling wondering if this calm was borrowed, temporary, or something I had denied myself my whole life. One evening, she asked me to sit across from her again, just like the first night. "Do you feel trapped?" she asked. The question hit me harder than any command ever had. I searched inside myself for the right answer, the safe answer. But what came out was the truth. "No," I said. My voice shook. I feel clear. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just nodded, like she had been waiting for honesty more than agreement. That's when the questions really began. Not from her, but from me. Who was I performing for all these years? Who taught me strength meant silence and control meant hiding softness? I remembered being a kid, scolded for the way I moved, the way I cared too much, the way I wanted to help instead of lead. I learned early how to fold myself into something acceptable. And now, decades later, I was unfolding in the most unexpected place, wearing an apron, following rules, and somehow feeling more real than ever. But reality has consequences. The closer I felt to myself, the further I felt from the life everyone expected me to live. Wedding plans started to feel distant, like they belonged to another couple. I caught myself wondering if I could stand in front of our families, smiling in a suit, knowing who I became behind closed doors. The thought made my chest ache. Not because of shame, but because of loss. Something would have to change. I just didn't know what yet. She sensed the tension building inside me. One afternoon, after I finished cleaning, she stopped me before I could leave the room. "This isn't a punishment," she said softly. "And it's not a joke. If this is hurting you, we stop." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much courage it took for her to say that. To risk losing me instead of owning me. My eyes burned. "It's not hurting me," I whispered. "It's waking me up." That was the moment our roles shifted again. Not back to how they were, but forward into something unfamiliar. She didn't give more orders that night. She asked me how I felt. I struggled to find the words, but I tried. I told her about the quiet, about the relief, about the fear that I was changing too much, too fast. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something I will never forget. "Maybe this isn't you becoming someone else. Maybe it's you finally stopping the act." Sleep didn't come easily after that. My mind replayed every version of myself I had ever been. Son, fiancé, provider, protector, and now, something unnamed. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the idea of losing her, or the idea of losing myself again just to keep everything familiar. As dawn crept in through the curtains, I understood one thing with painful clarity. This wasn't a phase I could wait out. A choice was coming, and whatever I chose would change me forever. The choice didn't arrive with fireworks or shouting. It came quietly, disguised as routine. A message from my mother asking about guest lists. A reminder email from the venue. A fitting appointment for my suit. Every notification felt like a knock on a door I wasn't sure I could open anymore. I started hesitating before answering calls, not because I didn't love them, but because I didn't know how to explain the person I was becoming without sounding like I was confessing a crime. Inside the house, the rhythm continued. I moved with more confidence now, less like someone pretending and more like someone inhabiting a role that finally fit. The uniform no longer felt like a costume. It felt honest. That realization brought a strange grief with it. I had spent so many years chasing approval, building a version of myself others could rely on, that admitting I wanted something different felt like betrayal. Not of her, but of everyone who believed they knew me. One night, after dinner, she asked me to sit beside her instead of across from her. The shift was subtle but powerful. "We can't ignore this anymore," she said. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was tired, tender. "I need to know what you want, not what you think you're supposed to want." I opened my mouth and nothing came out. My chest tightened. I realized I had never been asked that so directly in my entire life. What I wanted wasn't a simple answer. I wanted peace. I wanted permission. I wanted to stop performing strength and start living truth. I told her that being her maid hadn't taken anything from me. It had given me space to breathe, to care, to exist without constantly proving myself. I told her I was scared that if I chose this path, I would lose respect, family, certainty. And I told her I was even more scared that if I didn't choose it, I would lose myself forever. She reached for my hand, and for the first time, I felt like we were standing on the same uncertain ground instead of opposite sides of a rulebook. "I fell in love with you because you were honest with me," she said. "Not because you fit a role." Her words didn't solve anything, but they cracked something open inside me. I cried then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just tears I had postponed for years. The days that followed were the hardest. Not because of conflict, but because of clarity. Once you see yourself clearly, you can't unsee it. I started setting boundaries with the outside world, even if it meant uncomfortable conversations. I postponed fittings. I asked for time. Some people understood. Some didn't. Every reaction taught me something about whose expectations I had been carrying and which ones I could finally put down. Inside, the dynamic between us softened into something deeper. Less about instruction, more about trust. I still wore the uniform, but now it felt symbolic, like a reminder of the courage it took to be honest. She didn't need to tell me who to be anymore. I was learning that for myself. And with that learning came a strange strength, one I had never associated with softness before. One evening, as I finished my tasks, she watched me quietly and said, "You know this has changed you." I nodded. "I know," I replied. The difference was, this time, I wasn't afraid of that sentence. Change no longer felt like loss. It felt like alignment. I didn't know exactly what our future would look like, or what label fit me best, or how the world would react. But for the first time, I trusted myself enough to face those questions without hiding. I went to bed that night understanding something fundamental. This wasn't about being a maid. It was about shedding a life built on expectation and stepping into one built on truth. And once that door opens, it never closes quietly. The morning I finally told her the truth, it didn't feel dramatic. There was no trembling speech, no rehearsed confession. We were standing in the kitchen, sunlight cutting across the floor, the kind of ordinary moment where life usually hides its biggest decisions. She asked me what I wanted to do about the wedding, and instead of answering quickly like I always had, I took a breath and let the silence exist. That silence felt powerful. Honest. I said, "I don't want to pretend anymore." The words landed gently, but they changed everything. She didn't respond right away. She leaned against the counter, absorbing them, respecting them. In that pause, I realized how much this journey had reshaped both of us. This wasn't a story of one person controlling another. It was a story of two people stumbling into a truth neither of us expected. I told her I didn't know what our relationship would look like next, but I knew I couldn't go back to performing a version of myself that made me feel hollow. Saying it out loud felt like stepping into cold water, shocking, terrifying, and somehow cleansing. We talked for hours. About fear. About love. About how identities aren't switches you flip, but paths you slowly allow yourself to walk. She admitted she had sensed my hidden softness long before she ever suggested the maid role. Not as something to exploit, but as something she thought deserved space. Hearing that rewrote so many memories in my head. Moments I had labeled as weakness suddenly looked like honesty I'd been too scared to claim. The wedding was postponed. Some people were disappointed. Some were confused. A few were angry. But none of their reactions hurt as much as I'd imagined, because for the first time, I wasn't abandoning myself to keep them comfortable. I started redefining what strength meant to me. Strength was having hard conversations. Strength was choosing truth over tradition. Strength was allowing myself to change without demanding permission from the past. The uniform eventually stopped being a requirement and became a symbol. Not something I needed every day, but something that reminded me where my courage first showed up. I began exploring who I was beyond labels, beyond roles assigned at birth or by society. It wasn't about replacing one box with another. It was about living honestly inside my own skin. Some days were confusing. Some were joyful. All of them were real. She stayed. Not because she owned me, and not because I became what she wanted, but because we chose to meet each other without masks. Our relationship transformed into something quieter, deeper, less performative. Love stopped being about fitting expectations and started being about witnessing each other's growth, even when it was uncomfortable. When I look back now, I don't see the moment she made me her maid as humiliation or control. I see it as the doorway I never knew I was allowed to walk through. A strange, unexpected invitation to meet myself honestly for the first time. That experience didn't take away my future. It gave me one that actually felt like mine. I changed forever, not because of a uniform or a role, but because I finally chose courage over fear and truth over performance. And once you do that, there is no going back, only forward, into a life that finally feels real.